The betrayal started with garbage bags. Plain black garbage bags stacked in my driveway at 5 a.m. Garbage betrayal. I'd encountered backstabbing in business before, but never so literally. Someone was using my property as their personal dumpster. I stood in my bathrobe, coffee mug trembling in my hand, staring at the pile. 3 weeks in Whispering Pines, and already I was being targeted. The moving trucks had barely left, and someone had decided my driveway was fair game. "What the actual hell?" I muttered, approaching the heap cautiously. The pungent smell of leaking trash juice on hot concrete made my nose wrinkle. Using the toe of my slipper, I nudged one bag. It split open, spilling what appeared to be renovation debris onto my freshly sealed concrete. Drywall chunks, paint chips, some broken ceramic tiles, and what looked like old cabinet hardware tumbled out. I sighed, went inside to change into proper clothes, and grabbed a pair of work gloves. 7 years running a waste management company, and here I was picking through garbage on my own property. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I sorted through the mess, a voice called from the sidewalk. "Hey there, new neighbor. Whoa, someone left you a housewarming gift, huh?" I turned to see an older man in his 60s with a small dog on a leash. He had the weathered look of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. "If that's what you call it," I replied, standing up, "I've got bags of garbage in my driveway, and I haven't even thrown a party yet." Let me guess. Did they have little pink slips attached to them? No, just good old-fashioned mystery trash. Why? The mechanical click-hiss of sprinklers starting across the neighborhood punctuated the morning air. Consider yourself lucky, then. Pink slip means Valerie's already targeting you. She runs the HOA like it's her personal fiefdom. He walked closer, extending his hand. "I'm Ted, 2 doors down on the right." "Mike," I said, shaking his hand. "I just moved in?" "Oh, I know, everyone knows. The old Hartwell place finally sold. Gotta say, we were all wondering who'd buy it, given the circumstances." "Circumstances?" Ted's eyes widened slightly. "You didn't know? The listing history on this place? The price drops?" I shrugged. I got a good deal, that's all I cared about. "There's a reason for that good deal, son. This house has what the realtors call," he made air quotes, "a complicated history with the neighborhood association." "Well, I deal with waste management for a living," I said, gesturing to the trash. "So this is actually right in my wheelhouse. I own Clean Slate Waste Management." Ted whistled. "No kidding. Well, that's convenient." He glanced around nervously. "Listen, friendly advice? Get yourself some cameras. The last owner did right before he, moved on." "Moved on?" "Died," Ted clarified. "Heart attack right after a particularly nasty HOA meeting." I felt a chill despite the morning heat. "Anyway," Ted continued, tugging on his dog's leash, "I better finish our walk before Valerie decides my dog is violating the acceptable pet visibility timeline or some nonsense." As Ted walked away, I noticed a white SUV with Whispering Pines HOA security emblazoned on the side, cruising slowly down the street. It paused briefly in front of my house before continuing on. I returned to sorting through the garbage, my mind racing. As I lifted one of the bags to drag it to my garage, a manila envelope slipped out from underneath. The tab was labeled in neat handwriting. Renovation approval. Winters, 467 Oakmont Circle. Winters. Why did that sound familiar? I opened the envelope and found HOA paperwork inside. Forms for exterior renovation approval for a kitchen remodel. At the bottom of the page was an elegant signature. Valerie Winters, HOA President. Well, wasn't that interesting? The next day, I decided to install security cameras. After the trash incident, I wasn't taking any chances. I'd ordered high-definition wireless cameras with night vision and motion detection, top-of-the-line stuff we used at some of our facilities. I was on a stepladder, mounting the front camera to get a good view of my driveway, when I heard the clip-clop of heels on concrete. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" I turned to see a woman glaring at me from the edge of my driveway. Her arms were crossed over her chest, fingers drumming against her bicep. She was in her early 50s, with perfectly highlighted hair, wearing a cream-colored blouse and tailored slacks that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager." "Installing a security camera," I answered, tightening the last screw. "Someone's been using my driveway as a dump." "That's not approved by the HOA. All exterior modifications require written permission." The waxy, overpowering scent of expensive perfume hit me as she moved closer. I could practically taste the floral notes hanging in the air. I climbed down from my stepladder, wiping my hands on my jeans. A power move. Let her wait while I took my time. "You must be Valerie." Her eyebrows arched. "That's Mrs. Winters to you, and you're in violation of at least 3 bylaws right now." "Only 3? I must be slacking." Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't a joke, Mr. Harrington, Mike Harrington." I extended my hand, which she pointedly ignored. "Mr. Harrington, Whispering Pines has standards. Standards that were clearly outlined in your homeowner packet. Did you even read it?" "I've been a bit busy dealing with the trash someone dumped in my driveway. Funny coincidence. I found your renovation paperwork mixed in with it." Her face remained impressively neutral, but a muscle twitched near her eye. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said coldly. "But I do know that unauthorized surveillance equipment, improper waste disposal, and—" She glanced at my company truck parked in the driveway. "Commercial vehicles violate our covenants." From her designer handbag, she produced 3 pre-printed violation notices, each a different color, and handed them to me with a flourish. "You have 72 hours to comply or face fines of $100 per day per violation." "You know," I said, examining the papers, "most people would start with a friendly introduction, maybe a welcome basket. This isn't a social call, Mr. Harrington. This is about maintaining property values and community standards." "Right," I nodded. "And does dumping construction waste on your neighbor's property fall under community standards?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'll be watching you very closely." "Funny, that's why I'm installing these cameras, so I can watch very closely too." As Valerie turned to leave, I noticed a police cruiser pulling up to the curb. Great, just what I needed. The officer who approached was in his 30s, fit, with the patient but alert expression of someone who deals with ridiculous situations for a living. "Officer Dave Riley," he introduced himself. "We received a call about a disturbance." Valerie immediately stepped toward him. "Yes, officer. This man is harassing me and has installed unauthorized surveillance equipment." "On my own property," I clarified. "And the only harassment happening is the trash being dumped in my driveway." "Sir, we've received a complaint about illegal dumping," Officer Riley said. "Yeah, I'm the one being dumped on. Mrs. Winters says you've been bringing commercial waste into a residential area." The crackling static of the police radio filled the momentary silence. "Officer, I literally own a waste management company. Why would I dump trash in my own driveway?" I showed Officer Riley my business card and explained the situation, including finding Valerie's paperwork in the trash. "I was actually just installing security cameras to catch whoever's responsible," I added, which apparently is against HOA rules. Officer Riley glanced at Valerie, whose face had turned an interesting shade of pink. "Mrs. Winters, do you have any knowledge of the trash Mr. Harrington is describing?" "Absolutely not. And regardless of his claims, he still needs proper approval for exterior modifications." Officer Riley sighed, in a way that suggested he'd mediated plenty of HOA disputes before. Mr. Harrington, I can't do anything about your HOA rules, but I'd recommend keeping any evidence you collect. If someone is dumping on your property, that's trespassing, and possibly illegal dumping depending on what it is. After they both left, Officer Riley to his patrol car and Valerie to her large house 3 doors down, I finished installing the cameras. As I worked, I noticed something peculiar. Valerie's house had scaffolding along one side and a dumpster in the driveway, a dumpster from my competitor, Porter Waste Services. I took out my phone and zoomed in on the permit taped to her window. Kitchen and master bath remodel. Exactly what was in the paperwork I'd found. That evening, I went through the trash bags more carefully, with better gloves this time. Inside the second bag, buried under drywall pieces, I found a receipt from Winters Construction for specialized cabinet hardware, dated just 3 days ago. I smiled to myself. The game was on. "So, let me get this straight," Jackson said, leaning back in his chair in my kitchen the next evening. "The HOA president is using your driveway as her personal dump site, and then fining you for having trash on your property?" Jackson had been my best friend since college, and was now my business partner at Clean Slate. He'd come over to help me strategize after I'd filled him in on my neighborhood welcome. "Pretty much," I confirmed, sliding a beer across the counter to him. "And she's married to a contractor who's renovating their house." "Ballsy," he whistled. "You'd think a contractor would know better." "It's about saving money. Porter charges by weight for their dumpsters. The lighter the load, the less they pay." "So, what's your move?" Jackson asked. "First, I need to know what I'm dealing with. I've got the cameras set up, but I want to understand why she's so quick to target me." The next day, I started making the rounds, meeting my neighbors under the guise of introducing myself. First stop was the house directly across from mine, where a woman was struggling to wrangle an oversized inflatable Halloween pumpkin. "Need a hand?" I offered, jogging across the street. "God, yes," she panted, blowing hair from her face. "This thing is possessed." Together, we secured the decoration. Up close, I could see she was in her 30s, with dark curly hair tied back in a messy ponytail. "I'm Mike," I said. "Just moved in across the street." "Rebecca?" she replied, extending a hand. The rough texture of her calloused palm suggested manual labor. "Single mom, chronic HOA violator, apparently." "Let me guess, Valerie Winters?" Rebecca rolled her eyes. "That woman has fined me for my Christmas lights being too bright, my Halloween decorations being too scary, and my 4th of July flags being too patriotic. How is something too patriotic in America?" "She seems to have a special talent for finding violations," I agreed. "It's targeted," Rebecca said flatly. "She loves making examples of people who don't fit her vision of the perfect neighborhood. I work as a landscaper. My hands are never going to be country club ready, and my yard will always be a bit more creative than the others. It drives her crazy." "What about her husband? He seems to be in construction." "Richard. He's not as bad, actually. Keeps to himself, does quality work from what I hear. But that son of theirs—" She shook her head. "Problem child?" "Trevor's a teenager who thinks rules don't apply to him because mommy runs the neighborhood. Got caught spray painting the community center last year, but miraculously, no charges were filed." I continued my information-gathering mission down the street, meeting Franklin, a meticulous retiree who kept his yard immaculate. "I got fined because my grass was a 1/4 inch too high. A 1/4 inch! I measured it myself after she left," he fumed, showing me a logbook where he'd documented every interaction with the HOA. "That seems excessive," I agreed. "It's not about the grass," Franklin explained. "It's about control. Valerie needs to feel important. Her husband built his business from nothing while she—" He trailed off. "While she what?" Franklin glanced around, lowering his voice. "She inherited her money. Her father was Arthur Hartwell, The name clicked. As in my house? Hartwell? Bingo. That's why she's extra interested in you. That house was her childhood home. When old Arthur died last year, everyone assumed Valerie would inherit it. Instead, he left it to a nature conservancy, and they sold it to pay for preserving the wetlands behind the neighborhood. Wait, so her father owned my house but didn't leave it to her? Disinherited her completely. Rumor has it they had a falling out over those same wetlands. She and Richard wanted to develop the land for housing, but Arthur was dead set against it. Next thing you know, he changes his will and leaves everything to conservation. I thanked Franklin and headed home, my mind racing. This wasn't just random harassment. It was personal. That night, my security system alerted me to movement on my driveway. I checked my phone and watched in real time as a luxury SUV pulled up with its lights off. Two figures emerged. A middle-aged man directing a teenage boy where to place bags of debris, while a woman remained in the driver's seat. I watched the footage again, stunned at their boldness. The timestamp showed 2:38 a.m. Valerie's husband directed their teenage son where to stack the bags while she sat in their luxury SUV, headlights off, engine running. Gotcha, I whispered to the screen, a smile spreading across my face. I immediately texted Jackson. Remember that waste auditing service we were considering? I think I just found our first client, and I'm going to need a dumpster, a big one, right on my front lawn. Dude, this is either the dumbest or most brilliant thing we've ever done, Jackson said, adjusting the perfectly centered dumpster on my lawn. Both, definitely both, I replied, hammering in the clean slate waste management sign next to it. Jackson thumped the side of the empty dumpster, producing a hollow metallic sound that echoed down the street. You think she'll back off? No chance. But now we're playing by my rules. The dumpster was massive, bright blue with our company logo emblazoned on the sides. I'd filed all the proper paperwork with both the county and the HOA for residential renovation waste containment, citing the need for cleanup after the illegal dumping incidents. It was technically within regulations, I'd checked, but it was also a deliberate eyesore. Within an hour, I had company. Carlos and his crew pulled up in a truck loaded with equipment. So, let me get this straight, Carlos, my contractor, said with an amused expression. You want us to make it look like we're doing major renovations, but actually do minor cosmetic work that won't violate any codes? Exactly. I need activity, dust, trucks, and noise. All perfectly legal, but absolutely irritating. Man, I've done some petty jobs before, but this might take the cake, he laughed. I'm in. Carlos was an old business contact who'd helped with office renovations at Clean Slate. I trusted him to understand the delicate balance of what I needed. Enough legitimate work to justify the permits, but with maximum disruption potential. By noon, we had scaffolding up, tarps laid out, and the sounds of power tools filled the air. I'd approved some actual improvements, new exterior paint, landscaping, and a patio extension. But the primary goal was visibility. I didn't have to wait long for a reaction. At precisely 12:45 p.m., Valerie's luxury SUV screeched to a halt in front of my house. You cannot have that monstrosity on your lawn, she shrieked, pointing at the dumpster as if it had personally insulted her ancestors. Actually, I can. It's a registered commercial waste container for my ongoing home renovations. All paperwork has been filed with the county and the HOA. I never approved this. Check your inbox. I submitted everything electronically with red receipts. You opened it yesterday at 3:42 p.m. Her face flushed. I savored the moment, taking a slow sip from my coffee mug. This is not appropriate for our community aesthetic, she sputtered. Neither is dumping construction waste on my property at 2:38 in the morning. But here we are. Her eyes widened slightly. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact, backed by high-definition video evidence. Would you like to see it? I'm happy to share it with Officer Riley as well." Valerie's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Finally, she regained her composure. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I certainly hope not," I replied cheerfully. "I'm just getting started." She stormed back to her vehicle, phone already pressed to her ear. I had a feeling I knew exactly who she was calling. Sure enough, later that afternoon, an official HOA email arrived in my inbox, announcing an emergency meeting to discuss recent aesthetic violations and proposed bylaw amendments. It didn't take a genius to realize they were planning to change the rules specifically to target me. I forwarded the email to Sarah Patel, an attorney friend who'd helped with Clean Slate's contracts over the years, with a simple message: "Feel like helping me take down a neighborhood tyrant?" Her response was immediate. "Already researching housing discrimination precedents? This sounds fun?" That evening, I sat on my front porch, enjoying the unusually peaceful night. The dumpster gleamed under the streetlights, empty except for the few bags of mystery trash I'd received as a welcome gift. Ted ambled by with his dog, giving me a thumbs up. "Bold move," he called out. "She's livid." "Is she now?" "Emergency HOA meeting tomorrow night. Everyone's required to attend." I nodded. "Good. It's time everyone saw what's really happening here." The community center was packed the following evening. I arrived early with Sarah, securing seats near the front where Valerie would have to look at us throughout the meeting. "Remember," Sarah whispered, "let me do most of the talking. Housing association law is tricky." I nodded, scanning the room. Rebecca gave me a subtle wave from across the aisle. Franklin sat ramrod straight in the front row, his meticulous logbook open on his lap. Other neighbors I hadn't met yet filled the chairs, their expressions ranging from bored to anxious. Valerie entered with the rest of the board, 5 middle-aged homeowners who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She smoothed her skirt, tapped the microphone, and called the meeting to order with exaggerated formality. "Thank you all for coming to this emergency session. We have several pressing matters to address, primarily concerning aesthetic violations and proposed amendments to our community bylaws." She launched into a thinly veiled attack on new residents who disregard our standards, citing increased reports of eyesores and commercial activity. The proposed amendments would prohibit any waste containers visible from the street, ban commercial vehicles from driveways, and require triple approval for any exterior modifications. As she opened the floor for discussion before the vote, I raised my hand. Valerie pointedly looked past me, recognizing 3 other residents first, all of whom expressed support for maintaining neighborhood standards. Finally, she couldn't ignore me any longer. "Mr. Harrington, you have the floor, briefly." I stood. "Before we vote on any bylaw changes, I'd like to introduce my attorney, Sarah Patel, who has some information about illegal dumping in our community." Valerie's face drained of color. I continued, "We also have footage we'd be happy to share with the board and local authorities." The squeaking of chair legs against tile filled the room as several people shifted uncomfortably. Sarah rose smoothly. "Targeting a specific homeowner with bylaw changes after documented harassment constitutes discriminatory housing practices," she stated calmly, passing out folders to each board member. "We've taken the liberty of filing these complaints with both the county and federal housing authorities." "This is preposterous," Valerie stammered. "No one is being targeted." "The timing suggests otherwise," Sarah replied, "as does the specificity of the proposed changes, which coincidentally impact only Mr. Harrington's property. Additionally," she continued, opening her laptop, "we have video evidence of illegal dumping on Mr. Harrington's property, perpetrated by—" "This is not the appropriate forum for such accusations," Valerie interrupted, her voice tight. One of the board members, a man in his 60s who'd been reviewing the documents, cleared his throat. Actually, Valerie, I think we should see this evidence." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. I connected my phone to the projector, and the crystal-clear nighttime footage played on the screen. There was no mistaking the Winters family SUV, or Richard directing Trevor where to place the bags while Valerie sat in the driver's seat. When the video ended, the room was dead silent. "In the interest of community harmony," I finally said, "I'm willing to propose a compromise. I'll move my dumpster to my driveway instead of my lawn if the illegal dumping stops immediately, and in return, there will be no police reports filed about the incidents that have already occurred." The board member who'd spoken up nodded. "That seems reasonable." Valerie's hands gripped the podium so tightly her knuckles were white. "We'll take a brief recess," she announced, her voice barely controlled. In the hallway, neighbors gathered around me, asking questions and sharing their own HOA horror stories. I distributed flyers I'd prepared. "Mr. Harrington, are you serious?" Mrs. Peterson asked, clutching the flyer. "Free weekly pickup for 6 months?" "Absolutely. Clean Slate is expanding into residential service, and I thought my neighbors would make perfect beta testers." "This is so generous." "Just being neighborly," I smiled, watching Valerie from the corner of my eye as she realized she was being isolated. When the meeting reconvened, the board voted unanimously to table the proposed amendments and accept my compromise. As people filed out, I overheard snippets of conversation, all about the free waste service everyone was getting. Everyone except the Winters family, of course. The following week passed quietly. I moved the dumpster to my driveway as promised, and Carlos's crew continued their work at a reasonable pace. The neighborhood trash pickup commenced, earning goodwill and potential future customers. I thought perhaps Valerie had admitted defeat, until Jackson called me at the office on Friday. "We've got a problem," he said. "Environmental inspector just showed up. Anonymous complaints about improper waste handling." I sighed. "Let me guess, all filed within the last week?" "Looks that way. How do you want to handle it?" "I'll be right there. Give them the full tour. We have nothing to hide." When I arrived at our facility, Inspector Carver from the EPA was examining our sorting operation with a skeptical expression. "Mr. Harrington, I'm Inspector Carver from the EPA. We've received multiple complaints about improper waste handling at your facility. I'm not at liberty to discuss the timeline or sources." "Of course not. Well, let me give you the grand tour. We're actually certified at the highest level for sustainable waste management. Unlike most waste facilities, ours was designed to be as clean and efficient as possible. The surprisingly fresh, almost earthy smell of our immaculate waste sorting facility was often remarked upon by first-time visitors. By the end of the tour, Inspector Carver seemed impressed despite himself. "I have to say, Mr. Harrington, this isn't what I expected based on the complaints." "I'd be curious to know what exactly was alleged," I said casually. "Multiple reports of hazardous materials being improperly disposed of, specifically construction waste containing asbestos and lead paint." I raised my eyebrows. "Interesting. We specialize in proper disposal of exactly those materials. In fact, we just launched an audit program for construction companies to ensure compliance." Inspector Carver made a note. "I'll need to file follow-up reports, but I'm not seeing evidence of violations here." As he left, I couldn't help but feel Valerie had just handed me my next move. When I returned home that evening, I found my company truck vandalized in the driveway. The words "Trash Man" were spray-painted across the door with a crude drawing of a rat. The paint was still wet, dripping down the company logo. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, pulling out my phone to check the security camera. The footage showed Valerie's teenage son, Trevor, hoodie pulled up, face partially visible as he tagged my vehicle. He'd been careful to approach from the side, where the camera coverage was weaker, but not careful enough. I called Officer Riley, who arrived promptly. He sighed when I showed him the footage. That's definitely vandalism, and that's definitely the Winters kid. I'd like to press charges, I said firmly. I'll need to take statements and process the report. This kind of situation usually ends up in juvenile court and restitution. Fine by me. I also have something else you might be interested in. I showed him what I'd discovered earlier that day. Documents suggesting Valerie's husband's construction company had been disposing of hazardous materials in the protected wetland area behind the neighborhood. The same wetlands her father had fought to protect. Where did you get this information? Officer Riley asked carefully. Let's just say when someone targets your business with false environmental claims, you start looking into their own practices, and some of Winters Construction's former employees were happy to talk. Officer Riley studied the documents. I'll need to pass this along to our Environmental Crimes Unit and the EPA. This is beyond my jurisdiction. I understand. I just want the harassment to stop. As Officer Riley left, I noticed Trevor watching nervously from down the street. This was about to get much more complicated for the Winters family. The next few days brought a flurry of activity. Trevor was charged with vandalism and ordered to pay for repairs to my truck. Richard Winters called, almost pleading, to discuss an alternative arrangement for his son's punishment. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown. Look, Harrington, I know what you're doing, Richard said, his voice low as he slid into the booth across from me. This has gone far enough. Funny, I was thinking the same thing about the toxic waste your company dumped in the conservation area. His face hardened. That's a serious accusation. With serious evidence to back it up. The sharp smell of whiskey on Richard's breath wafted across the table as he leaned in threateningly. What do you want? Money? I laughed. No, Richard. I want something much more valuable in Whispering Pines. I want your wife to back the hell off. He sat back, running a hand through his thinning hair. You don't understand. Valerie's complicated. That house means everything to her. The house her father didn't leave her? Richard's eyes widened slightly. You know about that? I know enough. I know she's been harassing me since day one because of who previously owned my house. I know she's using your company to cut corners on waste disposal, and I know your son is facing criminal charges because of her vendetta. Richard stared into his coffee. My company's already under investigation because of your tip to the EPA. Not my tip. Your company's former employees. I just connected the dots. Either way, I'm looking at possible jail time. Valerie doesn't know yet. I studied him carefully. Richard Winters didn't look like a master criminal. He looked like a man who'd made bad decisions under pressure. Why did you do it? The wetlands dumping? Cost-cutting at first. The economy hit construction hard. Then it became... He hesitated. A habit? A business model? Something like that. He sighed. Valerie has expensive tastes. The truth is, I've been barely staying afloat for years. And your wife doesn't know? Valerie sees what she wants to see. She grew up with money, expects to have money. When her father cut her off and then left everything to conservation, He trailed off. She what? She snapped. She's obsessed with your house. It's not just about the property, it's what it represents. Her father chose nature over her. I processed this information, recalibrating my approach. Here's my offer. Your son works for me, cleaning up the wetlands as community service. You cooperate fully with the EPA investigation, and you make sure your wife understands that any further harassment will result in every piece of evidence I have going public. Richard hesitated. And in return? I'll put in a good word about your cooperation. Can't promise anything legally, but it might help. He nodded slowly. I'll talk to Valerie. Good. One more thing. All those trash bags you dumped on my property, I expect them to disappear from my driveway, and I expect you to pay for proper disposal through my company, of course. Richard grimaced, but nodded again. Fair enough. As Richard left, I felt oddly unsatisfied. The confrontation I'd been building toward had fizzled into something more complicated than simple revenge. I called Jackson. "How do you feel about a new community initiative?" I asked him. "Something involving wetland restoration?" "I feel like you're about to do something annoyingly noble instead of finishing your revenge plan," he replied. "Maybe, but I think I've found a way to do both." The next day, I partnered with Agent Torres from the EPA Criminal Investigation Division to set up a sting operation targeting Winters Construction's illegal disposal practices. "So you'll pose as a new client?" I confirmed with Agent Torres. "Yes, we'll approach Winters Construction about a job with specific waste disposal requirements that would be prohibitively expensive to handle legally." "And you think they'll take the bait?" "Based on the evidence you've provided of their previous dumping activities?" "Absolutely." The cool leather of the agent's portfolio felt expensive as he passed it to me, containing photos of environmental damage in the protected wetlands. The devastation was worse than I'd imagined. Chemical leaching, habitat destruction, and clear violations of multiple environmental laws. "We'll need a few days to set everything up," Agent Torres explained. "In the meantime, maintain your normal routine." Normal had become relative in Whispering Pines. Carlos's crew was making good progress on the actual improvements to my house. The neighborhood waste pickup program was running smoothly, earning goodwill from most residents. I'd even started attending the weekly coffee meetup at the community center. It was at one of these gatherings that I heard about the next emergency HOA meeting. "She's trying to invoke the Commercial Activity Clause," Rebecca whispered to me over her mug. "Claiming your waste service violates the residential-only restrictions." After all this? She's desperate. People are talking about voting her out at the next board election, especially after what happened with Trevor. I sighed. "When's the meeting?" "Tomorrow night. She's fast-tracking it." I immediately texted Sarah Patel, who agreed to join me again. "Round 2, she texted back. "Bring popcorn." The second emergency meeting was even more crowded than the first. News of the EPA investigation into Winters Construction had spread, along with rumors about Trevor's vandalism case. When Valerie called the meeting to order, her voice wavered slightly. "The bylaws clearly state that homeowners engaged in ongoing commercial activity can be subject to forced sale of their property," Valerie announced triumphantly, once she'd outlined the complaint against me. "Interesting interpretation," Sarah Patel replied coolly. "However, that would apply to nearly half the residents here who work from home, including yourself, Mrs. Winters, with your interior design consultations." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "That's different," Valerie stammered. "Those are professional services." "Yes, and waste management is an essential service, particularly environmental consultation, which is what Mr. Harrington primarily does from home. His actual waste processing occurs at his commercial facility." I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was giving Sarah a standing ovation. The board voted 4, 1 against Valerie's motion, with only Valerie voting in favor. As the meeting adjourned, Richard approached me in the hallway, looking haggard. "We need to talk," he muttered. "Not here." I nodded and followed him outside to the parking lot. The crisp evening air carried the earthy scent of recent rain, a welcome relief from the stuffy community center. "The EPA contacted me today," he said, leaning against his car. "They want to meet about a potential new client." "And you think it's a setup?" "I know it is." His shoulders slumped. "But Valerie's insisting I take the meeting anyway. Says we need the money more than ever now." I raised an eyebrow. "She doesn't know about the investigation?" "She knows something's happening, but she's convinced it's your fault, not because of anything we actually did wrong." He ran a hand through his hair. "I tried to tell her we should cooperate. Come clean about the wetlands, but she won't hear it. Says her father's land is rightfully hers, and she can do whatever she wants with it." "It's not her land, Richard. It belongs to the Conservation Trust now. Try telling her that." He glanced toward the community center where Valerie was still inside, berating the board members. "She's going to do something desperate. I can feel it." "Like what?" "I don't know. But she was on the phone all afternoon with someone. Kept saying things like tonight would be perfect and make sure it can't be traced." A chill ran up my spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. "You think she's planning something for tonight?" Richard wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm not saying anything. I just thought you should be careful." As he walked away, I immediately called Officer Riley. "Based on what you're telling me, I can drive by your place a few times tonight, but I can't station a patrol there without more concrete evidence," he said after I explained the situation. "I understand. Just wanted to give you a heads up in case something happens." I hung up and texted Jackson. "Possible situation at my house tonight. Valerie might be planning something." His response was immediate. "On my way with the truck. We'll set up a stakeout." An hour later, Jackson and I sat in his blacked-out clean-slate pickup down the street from my house, watching through night vision binoculars. "This is the dumbest stakeout ever," Jackson complained, munching on chips. "We look incredibly suspicious." "Less suspicious than sitting on my front porch with shotguns," I replied, adjusting the binoculars. "Marginally." At 11:23 p.m., our patience was rewarded. A nondescript white van with no markings pulled up across from my house. Two figures in dark clothing emerged, carrying what looked like canisters. "Are those—" Jackson started. "Paint sprayers," I confirmed, already dialing Officer Riley. "They're going to tag my house." "Or worse," Jackson muttered, pointing as one of the figures pulled out what appeared to be a knife. I quickly relayed what we were seeing to Officer Riley, who promised to be there in 3 minutes. "Don't engage," he warned. But as we watched, the individuals began slashing my garbage bags and spreading the contents across the lawn. Then they started spraying something on my front door. "That's not paint," Jackson said suddenly. "That smells like chemicals." The acrid scent drifted to us even from our position down the street. It burned my nostrils and made my eyes water. "That's industrial solvent," I realized with horror. "It'll eat right through the door finish and possibly compromise the structure." "Screw waiting," Jackson said, starting the engine. "They're damaging your property with hazardous materials." We drove up with the high beams on, catching the vandals in the act. They froze momentarily, then scrambled back toward their van. "Police are coming!" I shouted, jumping out of the truck. "You might want to consider not being here when they arrive." One of the figures turned toward me, and in the beam of the headlights I caught a glimpse of a familiar face beneath the hood. Not Trevor Winters as I'd expected, but an adult I'd seen working for Richard's construction company. They peeled away just as Officer Riley's cruiser turned onto the street, lights flashing. "They went that way," Jackson pointed, as Riley pulled up. "I'll put out an alert," Riley said, exiting his vehicle. "Did you get a plate number?" "Better," I replied, pointing to my security cameras. "I got faces." As we reviewed the footage, the extent of the damage became clear. They'd spread garbage across my lawn, slashed my garbage bags, and sprayed industrial solvent on my front door, which was already bubbling and peeling. That's property damage, vandalism, illegal dumping, and improper disposal of hazardous materials, Riley listed, taking notes. And based on this footage, those are employees of Winters Construction. Not Trevor or Richard? No, but it doesn't matter. If they work for Richard, he's liable. I nodded, a sick feeling growing in my stomach. I don't think Richard ordered this, but I know who did. Officer Riley's radio crackled. Units responding to a 10-54 at 467 Oakmont Circle. Possible domestic disturbance. That was Valerie's address. "I need to go," Riley said. Will you be okay here? Yeah, we'll start cleaning up. Let me know what happens. After Riley left, Jackson and I surveyed the damage. You know, for someone who deals with waste management, you sure attract a lot of garbage, he joked weakly. Tell me about it, I sighed, grabbing gloves from his truck. Let's contain that solvent before it does more damage. As we worked, more police cruisers raced toward the Winters residence. Something serious was happening over there. It wasn't until morning that I learned what had transpired. Richard had confronted Valerie about the vandalism, which she'd apparently arranged without his knowledge. The argument had escalated until neighbors called the police. When officers arrived, they found Richard packing his bags, Valerie screaming at him, and evidence throughout their home of both the vandalism plot and the illegal dumping operation. Richard had finally snapped and was gathering evidence to turn himself in. They're both being questioned, Officer Riley informed me when he stopped by to take additional statements. Richard's cooperating fully, detailing years of environmental violations and Valerie's role in covering them up and harassing neighbors. And Trevor? With his grandparents for now. Poor kid was sleeping through the whole thing. Apparently he had no idea about most of it. I nodded, looking at my damaged front door. Carlos had already stopped by to assess the repair costs, which would be substantial. The thing is, Riley continued, the EPA was already planning to raid Winters Construction tomorrow based on your information and their sting operation. Now they've got enough for search warrants of the house, too. By afternoon, the news had spread throughout Whispering Pines. EPA agents in hazmat suits were examining the wetlands behind the neighborhood. Journalists had gathered at the community entrance. The HOA board called an emergency session to distance themselves from Valerie. I sat on my porch, watching the chaos unfold with mixed emotions. This wasn't exactly the outcome I'd wanted. Yes, Valerie was facing consequences, but so was Richard, and Trevor's life was upended. The neighborhood was in turmoil. Jackson joined me, handing me a beer. Congratulations, you won. Why do you look so miserable? Because it doesn't feel like winning, I admitted. It feels like everyone lost. Welcome to the wonderful world of revenge, he said. It's never as satisfying as the movies make it seem. I took a long pull from my beer. So what now? Now we clean up the mess. It's what we do, right? The next day I met with Agent Torres to discuss the evidence Richard was providing against his own company. So you'll still pose as a new client? I confirmed with Agent Torres from the EPA Criminal Investigation Division. Yes, but now it's more of a controlled collection of evidence rather than a true sting. We'll approach Winters Construction about a job with specific waste disposal requirements that would be prohibitively expensive to handle legally. And you think they'll take the bait? Based on the evidence you've provided of their previous dumping activities? Absolutely. The cool leather of the agent's portfolio felt expensive as he passed it to me, containing photos of environmental damage in the protected wetlands. The damage is extensive, Torres explained. Chemical leaching, habitat destruction. It will take years to restore. I studied the images, recognizing the area behind the neighborhood where many residents walked their dogs. How had no one noticed? People see what they expect to see, Torres said, as if reading my mind. And Mrs. Winters made sure the HOA discouraged residents from exploring those areas, posted them as restricted for conservation reasons. Oh, the irony is staggering, I muttered. Over the next few days, I focused on repairing my property while the legal machinery ground forward. Carlos and his crew worked on my front door and driveway, replacing damaged portions and removing all traces of the solvent. Meanwhile, the HOA was in disarray. With Valerie under house arrest pending charges and Richard cooperating with authorities, the board called yet another emergency meeting to elect interim leadership. This community needs stability, Franklin declared, standing with his meticulous logbook. We need someone who understands regulations but won't abuse them. All eyes turned to me. Oh, hell no, I said immediately. I'm the last person who should be on the HOA board. Actually, Rebecca countered, you might be exactly who we need. Someone who can't be pushed around and who actually understands regulations. The stuffy warmth of the overcrowded community center made me uncomfortable. Or maybe it was the prospect of taking on HOA responsibilities. Bodies packed together in metal folding chairs stared at me expectantly. I looked around the room at my neighbors, people I'd come to know during this absurd waste war. They actually trusted me. That was unexpected. I'll help with the transition, I found myself saying, but only as an advisor, not as president. Relief washed over the crowd. They nominated Franklin as interim president, with Rebecca and 2 others forming the board. I agreed to consult on updating the bylaws to prevent future abuses of power. After the meeting, I drove past the Winters residence. The house looked deserted, the renovation scaffolding abandoned, the Porter waste dumpster overflowing and neglected. I slowed when I noticed a figure sitting on the front steps. Trevor Winters, hunched over his phone, looking lost. I pulled over, hesitating before getting out. This kid had vandalized my truck, but he was also a victim of his parents' choices. "Hey," I said awkwardly, approaching. "You hungry?" He looked up, surprise crossing his face. "Why would you even talk to me? I vandalized your truck." "Yeah, about that. You're helping me repaint it this weekend. Consider it community service." A ghost of a smile. "That's fair." We ended up at the diner by the highway, Trevor demolishing a burger while I picked at fries. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Are you staying with your grandparents?" He nodded. "Mom's lawyers are trying to get her out on bail. Dad's still cooperating with the feds. Nobody really tells me anything." "That's rough." "The worst part is, I didn't even know what they were doing in the wetlands. I just thought my dad was cheap about garbage disposal." He pushed his plate away. "Everyone at school is talking about it, calling my dad a criminal and my mom crazy." "Kids can be cruel," I acknowledged, "but this will blow over." "Easy for you to say, you won." I sighed. "Trust me, kid, nobody won here. Your parents made bad choices, but that doesn't define you." Trevor studied me suspiciously. "Why are you being nice to me? My mom tried to destroy your house. My dad's company dumped toxic waste. I spray-painted your truck." "Because carrying around anger is exhausting, and I'm tired. Also, someone's got to break the cycle of neighborhood warfare." After dropping Trevor off, I drove to the conservation area behind the neighborhood. The entrance was taped off with EPA warnings, but I could see the damage from the access road. What had once been a thriving wetland ecosystem was now a chemical-laden hazard zone. "The irony," Rebecca explained as we walked the overgrown trails the next day, having gained special permission from the EPA to survey the damage, is that her father left it to the Conservancy because he knew Valerie would develop it, but the Conservancy doesn't have the resources to maintain it either. I stopped, looking around at the natural beauty that was slowly being reclaimed by invasive species and damaged by illegal dumping. An idea began forming, a way to clean up more than one kind of mess. "What if we turned the damaged wetlands into an environmental education center?" I suggested. Clean Slate could sponsor it, provide expertise on restoration, and the community service sentences for the Winters family could be served helping to rebuild what they damaged. Rebecca looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "You want the people who destroyed this place to help restore it?" "Sometimes the people who create the problem are exactly the ones who need to fix it," I replied. "Besides, I'm in waste management. Turning garbage into something useful is literally my job description." My proposal to the environmental authorities was met with skepticism at first. Agent Torres frowned as I outlined my plan in the clean slate conference room. "Let me get this straight," he said. "You want convicted environmental criminals to work on an environmental restoration project? As their punishment?" "Under supervision, with proper training," I clarified. "And only after they've served whatever jail time is deemed appropriate. This would be part of their community service and restitution." "It's unorthodox," Torres admitted. "So is dumping toxic waste in protected wetlands," I countered. "But traditional punishments just create more waste. Wasted time, wasted potential, wasted opportunity for restoration." Jackson, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the meeting, finally spoke up. "I hate to admit it, but Mike's right. We have the expertise to oversee this properly, and forcing the Winters to literally clean up their own mess has a certain poetic justice to it." Torres tapped his pen against his notepad. "I'll present it to the prosecutor, but I can't make any promises." That evening, I was surprised by a knock at my door. Richard Winters stood on my porch, looking haggard but resolute. "Look, Harrington, I know what you're doing," Richard said, his voice low. "This has gone far enough." "Funny, I was thinking the same thing about the toxic waste your company dumped in the conservation area." His face hardened. "That's a serious accusation." "With serious evidence to back it up." The sharp smell of whiskey on Richard's breath wafted between us as he leaned in threateningly. "What do you want? Money?" I laughed. "No, Richard. I want something much more valuable in Whispering Pines. I want your wife to back the hell off." "She's facing criminal charges. Her reputation is destroyed, and our company is bankrupt. How much more backed off can she get?" "I'm not interested in destroying your family, Richard. I'm interested in restoring the damage you've done." I outlined my proposal for the Wetlands Restoration Project and Educational Center. Richard listened with growing confusion. "Why would you do this?" he asked finally. "After everything Valerie did to you?" "Because I'm tired of the war, and because your son deserves better than parents in prison and a toxic inheritance." Richard's eyes welled up unexpectedly. "Trevor," he whispered. "What happens to him in all this?" "That depends on what you do next. You can fight the charges and probably lose badly, or you can cooperate fully, make restitution, and start rebuilding something worthwhile." He nodded slowly. "I'll talk to my lawyer." Over the next week, things moved quickly. The EPA approved my proposal as part of a larger settlement with Winters Construction. The HOA board unanimously voted to partner with the Conservation Trust on the restoration project. Clean Slate would provide expertise and equipment, while community volunteers would supply labor. Richard's cooperation led to reduced charges, though he still faced significant fines and probation. Trevor began working weekends at Clean Slate, learning about proper waste management and environmental remediation. Valerie remained under house arrest, her case more complicated due to her role in orchestrating harassment and vandalism on top of the environmental crimes. She refused all plea deals, insisting she'd done nothing wrong. I was finishing up paperwork in my home office when Officer Riley stopped by with an update. "Thought you'd want to know," he said, accepting the coffee I offered. "We found evidence at the Winters house linking Valerie to 3 other incidents of property damage in the neighborhood over the past 2 years. She's been waging a systematic campaign against anyone who challenged her authority." "That doesn't surprise me," I replied. "How's she taking the additional charges?" "Not well. Her lawyer's pushing for a psychiatric evaluation." I nodded, unsure how to feel about that. Part of me still wanted to see Valerie face full consequences for her actions, but another part recognized that she clearly wasn't well. "Oh, and there's one more thing," Riley added. "While cataloging evidence from their home office, we found documents relating to your house. Detailed plans for interior renovations, dated years before her father died." "What does that mean?" "It means she was planning to move into that house long before it was available, like she expected to inherit it regardless of her relationship with her father." That night, I found myself studying my house with new eyes. What about this place had inspired such obsession? It was a beautiful home, certainly, but nothing extraordinary by Whispering Pines standards. The answer came the next day, when Franklin dropped by with a neighborhood history book he'd compiled. "Thought you might want to see this," he said, pointing to a black and white photograph. "That's your house when Arthur Hartwell built it, back in the 60s. And that's his wife, Ellen." The photograph showed a much younger Arthur, with his arm around a beautiful woman who looked strikingly like Valerie, standing proudly in front of my house. "Ellen died when Valerie was just a girl," Franklin explained. "Cancer. Arthur never remarried. That house was his tribute to her. He built it for her, designed parts of it with her. To Valerie, it wasn't just property, it was her mother's legacy." Suddenly, Valerie's fixation made a painful kind of sense. It didn't excuse her actions, but it explained the depth of her rage at being denied what she saw as her birthright. The revelation left me conflicted. How do you balance justice with compassion, accountability with understanding? The answer, as with most waste management problems, lay in proper sorting, separating the harmful actions from the human beings who committed them. 6 months passed in a flurry of activity. The wetlands restoration project broke ground with unexpected community support. Clean Slate's residential service expanded beyond Whispering Pines, creating a new revenue stream. Trevor Winters continued working part-time for us, showing a genuine interest in environmental science. "I can't believe I'm saying this," Jackson remarked one day, surveying the Environmental Education Center's construction site. "But your petty revenge scheme somehow turned into a legitimate community improvement project." "I prefer to think of it as recycling a bad situation," I replied, watching as Richard and his son led a group of volunteers through the newly cleared trails, explaining the restoration process. The sweet scent of native wildflowers blooming along the newly established paths filled the air, a promising sign of recovery. Richard had served 30 days in jail and was now completing his community service hours as our resident expert on what not to do with construction waste. His contrition seemed genuine, his expertise valuable. Valerie's case had taken longer to resolve. After a psychiatric evaluation confirmed severe anxiety and obsessive-compulsive tendencies exacerbated by grief, she accepted a plea deal. 6 months in a minimum security facility followed by extensive community service and therapy. Today was her first day back in the neighborhood, and tension hung in the air at the education center's soft opening. I spotted her standing awkwardly at the edge of the celebration, looking both out of place and somehow diminished without her designer clothes and imperious attitude. Our eyes met. I nodded slightly. She hesitated, then nodded back. "Is that a truce?" Rebecca asked incredulously, following my gaze. "Let's call it a managed waste agreement," I said. "Some things can't be recycled, but they can be contained." The new HOA was functioning smoothly with Franklin's meticulous oversight and Rebecca's practical approach. I'd helped rewrite the bylaws to prevent future abuses, then stepped back from active involvement. Clean Slate had launched a community education division, with Richard Winters ironically working there as part of his plea deal. His knowledge of construction waste combined with our environmental expertise created a unique program for contractors. As the event wound down, I found myself alone with Ted, who'd become a regular dinner guest and friend. "You know," Ted said, leaning on the fence between our properties, "when you first moved in, I gave you 6 months before Valerie drove you out." "Honestly, I nearly listed the house after that first week of trash dumps." "What made you stay and fight?" I thought about it, watching the community gathering at the center that had emerged from our ridiculous waste war. "Professional pride, I guess. I've spent my career telling people there's no such thing as throwing something away. There's only moving it somewhere else." I smiled. Some people just need a more hands-on demonstration of that concept. Later that week, I was sorting through some old boxes in my attic when I discovered a photo album that must have belonged to the previous owner. Inside were family photographs: Arthur, Ellen, and a young Valerie playing in the backyard of what was now my house. The little girl's smile was radiant, uncomplicated by the bitterness that would later define her. On impulse, I selected one of the happier photos. Valerie, around 10 years old, helping her father plant a tree in the backyard. The same tree that still stood outside my window. I placed it in an envelope and wrote a simple note. Some things are worth preserving. Trash man. That evening, I dropped it in Valerie's mailbox and walked away, feeling lighter than I had in months. The garbage war was over. The real cleanup had begun. 1 year later, the Whispering Pines Environmental Education Center opened officially, complete with boardwalks through the restored wetlands, educational exhibits on waste management, and a memorial plaque honoring Arthur Hartwell's conservation vision. Richard Winters had completed his community service but continued working with Clean Slate's education division. Trevor was heading to college on an environmental science scholarship, his past mistakes transformed into valuable perspective. Valerie had completed her sentence and therapy, emerging quieter but more grounded. She volunteered at the center occasionally, sharing her father's stories with visitors. My house had become home. Its complicated history, now just another layer in its foundation. The neighborhood had healed, transformed not despite the conflict, but because of how we chose to resolve it. Sometimes the worst dumping grounds become the most beautiful restoration sites. It just takes the right kind of waste management expertise and the wisdom to know that even the most toxic situations can be transformed with enough time, effort, and care. After all, that's what I do for a living. I turn other people's garbage into something useful. And in Whispering Pines, business is always booming.